Motion Corret's route relative to instructing the Department of Animal Services to report in regard to upgrading and making more reliable the hot weather mitigation systems in its vehicles and associated policies and protocols governing their use.
Good morning. I'm Dana Brown, Assistant General Manager with the Department of Animal Services.
Good morning, Council members. I'm Ernesto Poblano. I'm an officer with the Department of Animal Services.
As I have worked to prepare this report back for you, it sort of reminded me of how important it is to periodically reevaluate processes and procedures. Not only does it go a long way towards improving the things that we do and how we do it, it also gives the public a certain comfort level to know that we're always looking for ways to improve our services to them as well as to the animals under our care. There's quite a bit of information contained in this report, so I've tried to organize it so that it's easy to understand. So with regard to the fleet vehicles, we took a lot of time to test looking at the equipment that we currently use, the processes that are currently in place to deal with hot weather, and what we could do to improve upon what we already have. Our current fleet vehicle collection vehicles consist of 51 vehicles total. There are 36 ARVs, which are the industry standard. They're used by all of the surrounding agencies. These are the fiberglass animal compartment vehicles with the vented side panels. These are the ones that are equipped with blowers to the animal compartments. We also have 2 ARVs that are metal animal compartments. They have louvered side panels, and they are equipped with AC to the animal compartments. And then we have 12 vans. They are metal animal compartments with no vents or louvers. These have the tinted glass windows on each door, and they are equipped with AC to the animal compartments. So for testing, the department used the fiberglass ARVs and the vans since they are the most plentiful and the most available for use. To ascertain the ambient temperature of these vehicles under extremely hot conditions, we took readings of when the vehicles were driving with the blowers or the AC units on for 15 minutes. The results were the ARVs and the vans both had the same ambient temperature of 103 degrees. So you might ask, well, how is that if one has air conditioning and the other doesn't? Well, the chief reason is that there's one air conditioning unit that services the entire van. So as a result, both the front cab and the back of the van share the same AC source. By the time the air is pushed to the back of the van, it's minimal. Likewise, the windows on the side of the vans, although tinted, magnify the heat, further minimizing the impact of the AC. Finally, and probably most importantly, the lack of vents or louvers on the animal compartments contribute to low air circulation and the increased propensity towards overheating. So the department took a lot of thought into, public comment about the vans and why we don't use the vans. And it's been repeatedly mentioned in the conversation with the vans that air conditioning is sort of the answer to the issues that we're having with the heat. The department disagrees with this. While admittedly a properly functioning AC unit is certainly an environmental enhancement for the animals, but an appropriate ventilation system is what we believe is essential. It is our position that the key to solving the issues of excessive heat in the animal compartments are ventilation and science. So by ventilation, of course, I'm referring to the direct access to outside airflow, both in and out of the animal compartments. By science, I'm referring to the top-of-the-line products that are designed for optimum comfort for the animals in terms of temperature and airflow, which is sort of the perfect segue into the question, what are we doing now? The department is working with General Services on the acquisition of 5 new collection vehicles. These vehicles will be outfitted with compartments designed by CTEC, who is the leading manufacturer in animal collection enclosures. Their insulated, louvered compartments will provide a more comfortable environment for the animals during their time in the vehicle enclosures. 2 vehicles are scheduled for delivery next month, with others to follow. It is also important to note that Animal Services was able to work out an upgraded ventilation system for the new vehicles, which is an added comfort enhancement. And the reason we were able to do that is because most municipalities have to have dead animal compartments, and because we don't pick up dead animals, we were able to take that compartment out and do some upgrades to the ventilation. In addition to the new vehicles, the department has released a training bulletin to assist officers with driving protocols during extreme heat. The bulletin was released yesterday and is currently in practice. Finally, the department is in continued discussions to look at other options that might be available for the current fleet. Options such as removing the tinted glass from the vans and replacing it with louvers for outside airflow can be considered and costed out. In closing, the Department of Animal Services is committed to the best possible care for our animals, and we are always open to discuss ideas for improvement, as we believe that in the end, it is the animal's welfare that is paramount.
Thank you. So after 15 minutes of driving with air conditioning or whatever the best ventilation is on both vehicles, it was 103 degrees.
Yes, sir. And the reason for that is that because one of them had a ventilation system and the other one had an air condition with no ventilation system. So they pretty much leveled out, and they were the same.
Right, but they were the same at a level that most people would agree is too hot. 103 degrees, and that's best case scenario, driving around for 15 minutes, on your way back to the office or the shelter with the animal.
Yes, but I believe that, and I'll defer to my animal care professionals here, but I believe that the average temperature for dogs, for animals, is higher than our average temperature. So I believe that 102 to 102.5 degrees is what's average for them.
Meaning what?
Meaning that 103 is not so much over what is average. Now, while in terms of being able to cool it down even more, we would have to add one or the other thing to each of those types of vehicles. But in terms of what we have now, both vehicles provide the same amount of comfort for the animals. One that has only an AC, the other one that has only, the other one has air ventilation and a blower system.
So you're saying by average, you mean in other places they average 102 or 102.5?
No, the average that I was speaking of is the average temperature of an animal generally, when he is not heated or underheated, overheated, just the average temperature.
Right, but if you wouldn't transport humans in a car that was always 98.6 just because it matches our average temperature, most people would consider that uncomfortably hot.
That is true.
So you're saying we transport animals in situations where they're uncomfortably hot using either vehicle?
Well, I'm saying that with the current equipment that we have now, we do things like, for example, one of the reasons that we did 15 minutes is because we don't transport animals for much longer than that. Once we get the animal, especially in the heat, so once we get the animal in the compartment, we go back to the shelter or to wherever it is that we're going to.
And the 5 new vehicles, are those expected to be cooler than the vehicles we're talking about now?
They are. I will defer to Officer Poblano to explain a little bit more about the vehicles that we have coming.
Good morning. Yes, I can answer that question. They are going to be cooler, and the main reason they're going to be cooler is because they have larger ventilation vents along the side of the doors, and this allows airflow to go through the vehicle as the vehicle is being driven and at a stationary time too. And just to kind of reiterate a little bit what she was saying a minute ago, that when we took that 103 temperature of the vehicles, the ambient temperature on the outside of the vehicles was 105. So the fiberglass model had 103 internal temperature. The ambient temperature was 103 degrees, so it was cooler than the outside already. And the van, when we began those tests, was 130, and it was 105 outside. After 15 minutes, and then it went back down to 103. But during the entire time, the fiberglass model was 103 during the beginning to the whole thing.
And that's the one that's not the air-conditioned van?
That is correct.
Now, do you have some form of air conditioning that blows back there as well on the louvered version, or is it just the airflow?
Now, are you speaking of the fiberglass model or the new models?
I guess whichever you can tell me about.
Well, briefly, I can tell you a little bit about each. The fiberglass model has a blower that blows out 400 cubic feet per minute. The new models have an exhaust fan that is going to be sucking out air at 800 cubic feet per minute. The van has a air conditioning system that blows air from it's a shared unit that goes from the cab, and it has tubes that go into the back to cool off the rear compartments.
Is there a way to build one that has a more effective air conditioning system that actually cools the back?
Well, there are other air conditioning units out there in the market right now. We're looking into them, see what would be the best available situation for us.
And how cool do you think these new vans will be in the back?
Well, my preliminary research has showed that they will be 5 to 10 degrees cooler than the fiberglass models, which is already cooler than the van models.
So it could be in the mid-90s on a hot day.
Sure. If it's 100 degrees, we could say that technically, possibly that the steel bodies will be 10 degrees cooler than that. And that's because the manufacturer realizes that people are concerned about animals being overheated in the compartment, so they go through extensive insulation to make sure that that doesn't occur.
Have we looked at what other hotter places like Palm Springs do with their animals?
Yes, we did. Palm Springs, hold on, let me get my Palm Springs notes. So Palm Springs actually operates its own animal shelter and enforcement, and they only have one collection vehicle. That's all they need for the enforcement that they do, and it is it's a Ford F-250 chassis with metal ARVs on the back. Now, the difference between their compartments and ours, because that's really what this is about, the compartment and the air that comes through the compartment. So they have louvered sides, and they have C-Tech compartments. So their compartments are manufactured by this leading manufacturer that I spoke about earlier, and they do have air that goes back to the compartment.
And any idea how cool that compartment is as it operates?
No, actually, they were very, very nice when we talked to them, but they talked about the short staffing issues that they have, and they really didn't have the time to conduct tests in the time period that we needed them to. But they did give us a good deal of time on the telephone to kind of talk a little bit about, what they do, how, they don't go out very often. Obviously, they don't have the animals in their community like we do, and so they haven't had, but they did verify that they do not have problems with animal deaths from overheating. They regularly use the blowing system in conjunction with the C-Tech compartments to transport their animals comfortably. But the air conditioner is available there should they need it.
And it's not with ours, correct?
It is not with the larger fleet. No, we have two that are that way. Those two, though, unfortunately, we wanted to do some testing, but both of them are in service right now, being serviced. So they're not out right now.
It seems like that might be the answer, to have the louvered compartments and all the back end done as well as it could be, but air conditioning as well.
Yeah, 2 years ago, we designed the new animal bodies that are being constructed currently by C-Tech, And one of the improvements that we thought that would be crucial for this is to have those large louvered windows along all the compartments. Plus, we've had situations where air conditionings may not always work and there's no real way for the officer to know that the air conditioning is not working properly. So keeping that in mind, we decided to put in some backup safety devices into the new design. There's a passive vent system, so whenever the driver is driving the vehicle's moving, air is going to be sucked out of the compartment, so there's always going to be constant airflow. So nobody has to worry about anything, it's just passive.
And that would all be in the new one, that's the new 5 units?
Correct.
How much does it cost for each of those new units?
There are different prices. There's basically 2 different models. There's the truck chassis based, which is going to be on a GMC Sierra extended cab, and it has 7 compartments. That one is going to be $55,000, I believe. And there's the second model, which is going to be on the Ford Transit chassis, which is a first that in the nation. Nobody else has put a animal control body on a Ford Transit. And I believe that one's also going to be $55,000.
I guess I should ask the city attorney this. Are we aware of whether the city has any liability if we pick up a resident's animal and it would expire from the heat in the course of things under our current conditions?
Well, Lori Rittenberg, city attorney, it would depend on who has standing to sue. If one of the animals who passed away due to the heat was someone's animal and the animal was yet to be claimed, it was still within the time period for that animal to be claimed by its licensed owner, that could be, there's liability there. But in many cases, the dogs are surrendered and there's really no one who has standing to sue.
Okay. Other questions? Mr. Rue?
Kind of touched on it, but how often does your staff identify the heat exhaustion or related ailments in the animals you're transporting?
I wouldn't know that.
How often has it happened in the past?
Yeah.
We had an incident in 2013 where there was a confirmed heat-related incident with 8 animals. There were 8 animals that the employee had in the van, because the van takes more than just the 6. 5 of those animals suffered from heat exhaustion or heat-related illnesses, and they made full recoveries. 3 of them had to be euthanized.
Okay. How do you, unless the animal is exhibiting signs or is down, when you, open up the doors, is there any monitoring mechanism, to identify the heat exhaustion?
Well, other than when there's no monitors like in the cab, so that
visual?
There's not even a visual monitor in the cab where the employee can, while the employee's in the front, can see if an animal is exhibiting strange behavior in the back. That we don't have that currently. But what we do have, obviously, is the eye of the animal control officer when he or she parks, gets out the car, opens the cab, and sees if an animal seems to be in distress.
So when they identify an animal in distress, how do they treat the ailment?
I think it would just sort of depend. It would be, at the veterinarian's discretion. And unfortunately, I didn't bring Dr. Prupas with me today to comment on that. But I think it just sort of depends on, what kinds of symptoms the animal is exhibiting. There are a number of different kinds of symptoms. In fact, as I was gathering information, there was one of the things that I found was very interesting about the information that I gathered about, like, for example, there is the recumbent symptom where the animal is unable to lift his or her head or that sort of thing, or the heavy panting. Just different things like that the animal might exhibit to show us that there's a problem. And there are the more serious, neurological signs that the animal might twitch or, those sorts of things where we would have to immediately, obviously, get a vet's input to diagnose and treat.
So during the officer making his or her rounds, they go to the back and they see these signs. What's the protocol? Do they go to one of the shelters, veterinarian, or do they finish their rounds? Or
well, no, actually, once an animal gets into a compartment certainly on an excessively hot day, it is from that location to the shelter. So when they observed it, they should be at the shelter already. And there are even cases where we may observe something before. When we pick the animal up, we already observe something. And then the officers will, use their discretion to say, should I transport this animal? Should I call somebody else? Should we get a vet out here? It just sort of depends on the officer's discretion.
And final question, so what is the cost associated with the treatment of these conditions? Do you have that?
I don't. As much as I try to anticipate your question, right? No, I don't. I could report back on that, though. And not only that, but maybe just more, more general information about the cost of veterinary treatment.
If you could report back to our committee on that, and not just now, but maybe a historical, just so we could have a comparison.
Mr. Harris-Dawson, any questions? Are we still having these problems currently? Are we aware of heat problems currently, animals struggling health-wise during this heat wave?
No, there was a report of a similar situation where an animal was moved from the East Valley shelter to a rescue organization where a vet was supposed to be doing some dental work. The transport took place in the morning hours, but on an excessively hot day. According to the ACT supervisor or the ACT who did the transport, the animal was in the compartment for probably 10 to 15 minutes at the most to be taken to the facility. And when he got there, the receiving person alleged that the dog was overheated. We have the receiving party contacted the department, told us about this. She said that she had a veterinarian take the animal's temperature and do sort of a preliminary exam on the animal, and we asked her to provide us that information. We have not received it as yet. We do want to be careful with these allegations. We take them very, very seriously, but there could be a number of things up to and including disciplinary, personnel-related charges. So we want to be careful and have data to support the verbal claims of this sort. So to date, we don't have that, and we are waiting to get that information.
And rather than replace the entire fleet, are there any things that can be done to retrofit current vehicles to make them cooler than they are now?
I think that, so now I'm editorializing, but I believe that we should talk to General Services about the possibility of removing the glass in the vans and replacing it with a louvered system to provide the ventilation. And I think that would go a long way, but I obviously would need to talk to General Services as well as the other animal care professionals to see if that is something that would make a significant difference.
Okay, well, we should definitely get a report back on that as well. So I'll suggest, well, actually, we have one speaker from the public, so let me have that speaker speak first. Phyllis Doherty.
Thank you. Phyllis Doherty. I'm very emotional about this because we've received a lot of misinformation. Our trucks are breaking down in the street. One of them broke down just the other day in the heat, had to be towed in. One of them, the steering wheel came off in the officer's hands. We need to replace. These vehicles have not been replaced for 7 to 8 years, and they've not had proper maintenance. For safety, you're getting new Teslas for the police department. Please get an entire fleet. Talk to ACES, animal care equipment. They can design anything that you need for the heat. I live part-time in Arizona in Lake Havasu. No place is hotter. This would never, ever happen there. The length of time that they're driving, let me give you an example the other day. An officer had to bring a dog from Watts to the harbor shelter. He had already been running after the dog. It was a brachycephalic dog. That means a short-nosed pit bull that was aggressive. He had to catch the dog. The dog's already overheated. He puts it into the truck. The dog continues to thrash around, pant. He stops several times, tries pouring water on it, doing anything he can because of the long, long drive back to the shelter. We're talking about miles from the valley, in the valley area. One officer had to go 33 miles the other day. It took her 55 minutes. So we cannot count on any of this. We need the best for these animals. Councilman Koretz, it's a small investment to get them the best in both the cooling and the vehicles. Our officers are not safe breaking down in the street. The animals are not safe. Please talk to ACES, talk to Dr. Prupus, the chief veterinarian. Take their word, and ACES can provide you whatever answers you want. This is what they do, is develop this kind of equipment catered to the needs of the area. And if you want me to make a contact with them and have the president of the company contact you, I'd be glad to do that.
Thank you. I wonder if the department could come back up. I do want to ask a follow-up question about that. So, how are we doing in terms of the existing vehicles and their functionality? Are we actually having these kinds of problems? Are they breaking down? Which obviously would leave the animals without a lot of air access in that circumstance. What's happening with these vehicles? How old are they, et cetera?
We do have an older fleet, and we are in the process of replacing the older units. So in due time, we're going to be replacing all the older units, and hopefully those older units are the ones that are more problematic. We're working with fleet services to find out which of those vehicles are the most problematic to have those replaced first.
And that's with the first 5 vehicles that you're talking about?
Correct.
Is there a way to try and accelerate that?
That might be a question for our fleet services to. Are you talking about having the funds available for the purchase of the?
Well, all those pieces. Can we put together the money for it? If we had the money, could we actually produce those vans quickly?
Well, I can speak about the construction. One vehicle takes approximately 90 days to 4 months to construct.
But I don't know if the company can do more than one at a time, what their abilities are.
Oh, yeah, they can do simultaneous construction.
Do you have anything further to add on this?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, good morning. My name is Richard Colson, the Director of Fleet Services, and just wanted to give you a rundown. He had already mentioned that we're working on 5 vehicles for them already in the process of being built. For fiscal year 14-15, we have another 3 vehicles, the animal collection vehicles, that will be, once approved, they'll be built as well. And then in 15-16, which should be approved in this upcoming first FSR, we have another 9 vehicles, animal collection vehicles, that will be replaced as well. And just to kind of speak a little bit to the young lady that was up here before, some of these vehicles, the majority of these vehicles, as you know, over the last number of fiscal years, we haven't received the full MICLA funding to replace all the equipment that was over its useful life. And, of course, Animal Services was affected by that as well. A lot of the animal collection vehicles are 2000, 2001. Typically a life cycle for us, you're looking at 9 to 10 years, and these are 14 and 15 years now. I will tell you, when it comes in the shop for service, when it leaves, it's safe. It is old and it is falling apart, but we do everything in our power to ensure that once it leaves our shop, that it stays out and helps them do whatever they need to do as far as their operation. But again, we do see a high number of breakdowns. We see a high number of road calls. That's just attributed to the age of the equipment, though.
Which obviously would be disastrous for dogs that are stuck in a broken down vehicle in the heat.
Yeah, I understand that, but that's just the situation that we're in because it wasn't replaced when it came up for replacement.
Angela Sheriff Bright, Assistant General Manager with the Department of General Services. With respects to the vehicles that we're ordering, as Ms. Brown suggested, all of the new vehicles coming in are to Animal Services designs, which means that we do have the ventilation systems, we do have the louvers that they have requested. And with respects to replacement cycle, we are replacing them as soon as we get funding approved through the budget process. And so that's why we have 9 more coming up for replacement.
So how many do we have that are older than 9 years of the 55?
I'll have to count here. 16 2000s, 6 2001s, 10 2003s.
So we agree that these vehicles should be replaced, and we have requested in each budget cycle previous to this one that the vehicles are replaced. However, based on MICLA funding, that is how we are able to replace the vehicles. And so based on the funding that we're getting, those are the number of vehicles that we replace. Certainly, if we receive additional funding, we would replace more vehicles.
Okay, well, thank you, and I think we'll hold this item in committee. And if you could give us a written report on this issue, and especially on the ages of our current vehicles and how many we would have to replace for at least what's in the fleet in terms of being beyond their useful life, and what the plans are to do that now, and how many more we'd have to replace if we wanted to catch ourselves up.
Okay.
All right.
So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to item number 3.
Item number 3, motion Koretz Blumenfield relative to instructing the Department of Animal Services in consultation with the Department of General Services to explore options for upgrading and making more reliable the hot weather mitigation systems at its animal shelters and report in regard to Proposition F and other sources of funding for said upgrades.
Good morning again. So our animal shelters have a naturally built-in system in place for animal care, and I am then referring to our dedicated staff and volunteers who almost always have eyes on the animal and can observe behaviors. I bring this up because I think it's very important to note that there is no better mitigation system than the capable eye of an animal care professional. But even so, we have other systems in place to help safeguard the welfare of the animals in excessive heat. Each shelter has a cooling system in place for this reason. They are different at each shelter, so I'll briefly outline them for the committee. East Valley has a misting system for outside kennels. It has HVAC units for all the cat keeping areas, and it has the rabbits are being kept in the behavioral assessment room, and that room does have HVAC. West Valley, all kennels, both old and new, have HVAC units. There is an evaporative cooler or a swamp cooler in the cat room. The HVAC units and all other existing cat keeping areas are functional and present. The rabbit keeping area has a small independent window air conditioning unit at that shelter. North Central, it has a misting system for the newly constructed outside kennels, and the old pre-existing kennel areas have HVAC as well as retracting skylights. HVAC systems are also present in all the cat keeping areas, and the rabbit keeping area is located outside under a covered patio with a misting system for cooling. This area, it's important to note that this area is scheduled to be renovated during the Phase 2 construction for North Central. West LA has a misting system for the outside kennels. There is a swamp cooler in the dog isolation and dog quarantine areas. There's an HVAC unit for all the cat keeping areas, and there's an independent HVAC unit for the rabbit keeping. South LA has a misting system for the outside kennels, an HVAC unit in the dog isolation and dog quarantine areas, an HVAC unit for all the cat keeping areas, and an HVAC unit for the rabbit keeping area. And finally, the harbor has a misting system for the outside kennels, a swamp cooler in the dog isolation and dog quarantine areas, an HVAC system for all the cat keeping areas, and an HVAC unit for the rabbit keeping areas. Now, in addition to these cooling systems, the department also limits walking of the animals when the temperature is above 85 degrees. The decision is at the discretion of the vets and the vet staff and the ACT supervisors. But even with these methods in place, we can always do better. And through this exercise, we've come up with some immediate measures, excuse me, that we can take to further reduce the likelihood of problems. What we're doing today. GSD is responsible for the repair and maintenance of our existing equipment, and they have been very responsive in the past with our requests, and we have only had longer wait times when shipping was required. The current misting system was built a while back, and the manufacturer for those parts is located in Ohio. In order to reduce the possibility of lengthy wait times, shipping wait times, the department will work with GSD to have replacement parts on hand to fashion more of a proactive approach rather than reactive for future malfunctions. We'll also evaluate and discuss needs for alterations, for an alteration and improvement request for the misting system as well as the draining system as we proactively look toward rain. The last part of the motion talks a little bit about funding, about Prop F funding and other potential sources of funding to pay for upgrades. The North Central and West Valley shelters are currently undergoing Prop F funded renovations. That is, as I understand it, as much of the Prop F monies that can be used for maintenance. It's more of an upgrade, not maintenance. The CAO has advised that there is a preventative maintenance fund in the budget for facilities that are funded by Props F and Q. With the support of this committee, perhaps some monies from that fund could be allocated and available for upgrades to the cooling systems at our shelters, the cooling and heating systems at our shelters. There are also creative solutions that might offer support to the mayor's sustainability plan. There is funding for things that are in place that support the sustainability plan, and perhaps with some creative problem solving, we might be able to come up with something that fund might be able to support. The Animal Welfare Trust Fund does have a capital improvements project in support of the animals. Requests must be made through the Board of Animal Services Commission for initial approval of the expenditures. And also, just as a side note, the Animal Welfare Trust Fund also has a line item for interest accrued, and we looked into whether or not we would be able to use the interest from that account. Unfortunately, the ordinance does require that these monies be deposited into the fund and used according to the fund's guidelines. So, as I said at the onset, there's no operation is in a position where there's no room for improvement. And the department certainly welcomes the opportunity to improve services. We also ask that the committee take a look at a couple of indisputable facts related to shelter operations. Number one, there has never been a heat-related animal death in our shelters. Number two, no dogs are kept in a situation where they must stay outdoors. They all have access to structures. And third, and most importantly to me, the Department of Animal Services has a talented group of passionate animal care professionals who keep a watchful eye on the condition of their animals and will react when necessary. We believe that these indisputable facts, coupled with the enhancements mentioned in this report, will increase our level of service, which we consider to be a win for everyone.
Thank you. Couple of questions, and then I think we're running out of time, too, unfortunately. How are we on heat mitigation? Not heat mitigation issues. How are we on the other issues as well in terms of cooling when cooling in the heat and heat when it's cold? Obviously, we're expecting an El Nino, a lot of rain, a lot of cold, perhaps later on this year and into next. Are we prepared for that? And what are our weaknesses in the shelter system on that end?
As I talked a little bit as I was preparing for this, and I'm looking at the news, and I'm seeing that next week it's going to heat up again. And so all of the misters and all of the HVAC systems are operational right now. And the temperature is expected to get in the low 90s, high 90s, low 100s in the valley areas. And we believe that the misting systems properly functioning as they are, as well as the HVAC systems will work for that. As it relates to the coming rains, we are going to be looking into an A&I request so that we might be fashioning a different drainage system if we need to, or even a misting system, because the idea about the misting system change is that if we can get a system that has parts available locally, we don't have to have, the kind of wait times and shipping issues that we have. As it relates to the heat, I will defer to my colleague, and she will speak to that.
Hi, Christy Lozon, Animal Services ACT Supervisor.
So as it relates to heat, excessive cold.
For the excessive cold, we have the radiant heat that's in the slabs in the cubbies for all of the animals. What that does is it heats up the concrete slabs, so when they lay in there, they can get the heat, and it actually heats up the whole area for them.
To Christy's defense, she actually gave me all that information about heat, and then I took it all out for brevity, and then we talked about heat. So I know she's thinking, why didn't you just tell them? I told you about the heat. The heat is all there.
Well, it probably doesn't seem topical at this moment because we're facing so much heat.
Right. But Christy was diligent in giving me all the information about the radiant heat and the heating systems that are in the various areas. And actually, it might not be a bad idea for me just to send this information to you. It's kind of compact, where you can see the shelter, and you can see how we heat and cool for each type of animal. So I might, if the committee would like, I can put this information together and send it to you so that you have sort of a bird's eye of how it is that we heat and cool our animals.
Other questions, colleagues? If not, the one thing I would ask is, I'd ask, as you started to suggest, this all come back in a written report. And I'd like to ask that you include in it asking the CAO to add the CAO, I should say, to the list of departments to report on funding on hot weather mitigation upgrades, since they staff the Prop F Bond Oversight Committee. And I'd ask that we address the following issues: an assessment of each of the 6 animal shelters and what extreme weather features are at each facility, and in what kind of working order, and plans to upgrade any of them if they exist. Are they operated on an automated basis, or are they manually operated? What's the current maintenance schedule, and how are the problems reported to GSD? What are the protocols, and how do they respond? Whether there's any alternatives that we should be considering as part of the city's facilities programs, and were there any programmatic alternatives that the department has explored, such as temporarily relocating animals to cooler shelters during extreme heat waves? And perhaps most importantly, again, where where funds might be located and what assistance the department might be looking for.